The war between Ukraine and Russia continues. Millions of people have now fled the war-torn country, and the amount of civilian casualties continues to mount. Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed Parliament recently. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. Now, Brian, what did the Ukrainian president have to say?
It was a very emotional address, Hal. It was kept short for security reasons. He did not speak long, but he spoke emotionally. He spoke powerfully to the Canadian people, and he kept asking every member of parliament, every Canadian, and he kept saying, and my friend Justin, because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Zelensky have met before. Zelensky toured Canada a couple of years ago with Trudeau, and he kept saying, imagine waking up at 4 a.m. with the bombs dropping. Imagine having to flee with your children. Imagine 97 of Canada's children being killed in a war. And he kept making that emotionally charged argument for one reason. He wants a no-fly zone, and he needs Canada and other NATO allies to go in and block the skies. He says that his country can do the rest in fighting back against Putin's invasion. But when there are Russian missiles falling upon his country, when there are Russian planes taking out positions, that it makes it more difficult. He asked for that help to make it a fair fight. He did talk about how the sanctions are working. He applauded what Canada has done. And, you know, I'll be upfront. We have been at the forefront of pushing for some of the harsher sanctions, and 15 new Russians just sanctioned today in conjunction with European allies in the EU. We continue to push more on that. But Zelensky said it has not stopped the war. He needs a no-fly zone to stop the war.
So what's been the hesitation from NATO nations to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine? Is it that they're concerned that maybe this may bring on World War III?
That's exactly the point. They are sitting there and saying, we enforce a no-fly zone, which isn't just saying, okay, no planes can come up, but if there are planes there, if there are Russian planes over Ukrainian soil or Russian missiles, that we will shoot them down. And that would be seen as an act of war by Putin. Of course, Putin has engaged in an act of war by invading a neighboring sovereign country. And there have been, in the past, statements from Great Britain and the United States, actually along with Russia, that they would always respect Ukraine's territorial integrity. That obviously has been violated by Putin. But beyond sanctions, beyond the attempts to squeeze them financially and culturally, nothing else is happening at this point. If it's working slowly. It is having an effect, we know that, but it is working slowly. But so is Putin's army. It is slowly moving in to different parts of Russia. It has bombed several hospitals. It is, people who have been fleeing the war have been targeted by the Russians. Journalists have been killed. And so the argument from the Ukrainians is, you're watching genocide happen in slow motion. You need to do something. Whether the West has the stomach or not, I don't know. But as I've written before, we may not want war, but Putin does. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to stand there on Remembrance Day and say never again, while never again is happening before our very eyes?
Brian, we've seen, like you said, we've seen the horrific images of schools being attacked, hospitals, maternity ward, people being killed, civilians being killed in apartment complexes. These are unarmed civilians. Do you think we'll ever reach the point where Putin will be brought before a tribunal and charged with war crimes?
That process is already in place. So now it becomes a question of, is Vladimir Putin ever captured and brought to justice? If he ever ends up in the hands of a Western government again, then yes, he will be. Vladimir Putin is now in a position where he can't be traveling to any Western nation. He wouldn't be invited to these summits anymore anyway. Because of Putin's actions elsewhere, he was long ago kicked out of the G7, which we'd made G7+1, then G8. There's talk of kicking Russia out of the G20, but if a meeting for that organization were ever held in any Western country, he would be arrested, much like the oligarchs who are now fleeing in their yachts floating aimlessly in the Mediterranean and elsewhere with no destination registered as they set sail, because These are people and assets that they do not want to be captured. So Putin is now pretty much restricted to Russia, Belarus, China, maybe some countries in the Middle East in terms of his travel, because that International Criminal Court process has already started.
Now, Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just returned from meeting with European leaders discussing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and our PM was criticized when he returned home and it had to do something to do with what? One too many photo ops?
Look, I was fully supportive of the Prime Minister going to Europe. I thought that it was important. Face-to-face meetings are important. Anybody that's done politics, heck, even if you've only done sales, you know that face-to-face meeting, that relationship that you can build with people is important when you're asking them to do hard things. And so I think when we spoke last week, I was supportive of the PM's trip. And then about midweek, he was asked, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland was asked, well, is this just a big photo op? And the Liberals got their noses out of joint over that question. And how dare you ask that question? Well, because it's the reporter's job to ask difficult questions. Immediately after that, Hal, they did a photo op at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Then the next day, there were 7 photo ops out of a day with 8 items on the agenda, 7 photo ops for the Prime Minister. And then immediately as he got back last Friday, he released about a minute and a half long video that looks like a campaign ad all about Justin Trudeau and what he did in Europe. He did important work there. We could be doing more, absolutely, but we are working in concert with our allies. It was important for him to be there, absolutely. But when you're being criticized for having too many photo ops or trying to use it to change the channel off of the trucker convoy, the Emergencies Act, and the domestic problems here at home, don't turn around and release a campaign ad or campaign video, campaign style video at least, that, as somebody pointed out to me, they said it's 77 seconds long and Justin Trudeau's featured in 67 seconds of it. That just makes it look like you are using an international incident for your own political personal benefit back home. You know, a lot of these things, it's always aimed at the domestic audience. We know there's a large Ukrainian Canadian population, both in Edmonton, across Alberta, here in Toronto, massive one as well, more recent. Sure, a lot of this is aimed at them, but do the hard work, let the photos speak for themselves, and don't push the photo ops beyond the pale, which I think he did.
Conservative leadership candidate Jean Charest is going to be campaigning from home as he is self-isolating after testing positive for COVID-19. Brian, it appears as though a few of the CPC leadership candidates have been attacking one another. Now, it may not be the best plan of attack. As it says in the Bible, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand.
Well, and for voters, whether they've read the Bible, like that passage, don't like it, what voters look at is, wait a minute, you guys can't get along yourselves. Why would we put you in charge? You can't run your own house. Why would why would we let you run our house? This is off-putting for voters, and I know that you have to differentiate yourself in various ways. But this started because Pierre Poilievre, who is the perceived frontrunner, and let's face it, Poilievre started early. He's got great social media presence. He speaks well. He's getting people excited. If he's out in front, why was he turning around and punching down, as they say, at Jean Charest and Patrick Brown before they even entered the race? And not just with, hey, I'm a better leader than they are. I can actually win. Those guys won't, the usual things that they might do. But Jean Charest is not even a conservative. He's a liberal. He'll do this. He'll do that. Patrick Brown is a liar. Patrick Brown will do anything to get elected. So Brown responds with essentially calling Pierre Poilievre a racist as he's announcing an immigration policy. I've never seen anything like this. The closest I've seen, Hal, and it wasn't even that bad, is back in 2006. The Liberals needed a new leader. Stephen Harper had won the election. Paul Martin resigned. The Liberals had a pretty rough and ready leadership contest. But by comparison to this one, and this one's really, we're talking about the last week, it looked like a Sunday picnic. But what that did with them going at each other was gave the Conservatives a ton of ammunition to run attack ads. So right now, the Conservatives are doing the same thing the Liberals did 15 years ago. They're writing the attack ads for the party they're trying to replace. Can you imagine if Pierre Poilievre gets in, they're going to run Patrick Brown saying effectively he's a racist. If Patrick Brown wins, they're going to run Pierre Poilievre saying Patrick Brown's a liar. And they'll just use the attacks that they're each making about Jean Charest. Those are the three front runners. Those are the only three that I see have a chance of winning. And at least two of them are taking heavy shots at each other. Now, the Brown camp says they're only responding to punches that are thrown. And the Poilievre camp says we're only saying what's true. Well, at the end of the day, these guys and or their supporters all have to work together in one party to try and replace Trudeau. That's going to be a lot more difficult if it continues down this path.
So Prime Minister Justin Trudeau must be loving the fact that the top Conservative candidates are taking so many shots at each other.
You know, there's been talk that Trudeau might leave, that he might take his walk in the snow, as we've said since his dad did that in 1984 before resigning. But if they're going to make it easy for him, I don't think he will. I think, Trudeau loves to fight. We've seen that with how we responded to the truck convoy. We saw that in the boxing ring. We've seen how he relishes campaigns. And if he sees that he's got an easy shot or an easier shot against the next Conservative leader, I think he's going to stick around because, he's sitting there laughing. And, I've had Conservatives say to me, why are you repeating Liberal talking points? I'm not. I watched the Conservatives do the same thing. 2006, 2008, 2011, they loved when the Liberals were attacking each other because guess what? They used that as fodder for their own attack ads, and it was successful. It worked. The Conservatives ran the blueprint for this. The Liberals are just going to turn around and follow it now that the Conservatives are attacking each other like no party has before.
Brian, the price of oil continues to be volatile as the world has been dealing with many countries banning Russian oil. There doesn't appear to be any effort on the Trudeau Liberals' part, however, to free up more of our oil to help those countries in need. We also have an increase to the carbon tax coming up April 1st.
Yeah, all things headed in the wrong direction. Look, there's a poll out recently this week, I believe, saying majority of Americans want Keystone XL now. Well, too bad. TC Energy has walked away from that project a long time ago. That they're not going to come back because they went through more than a decade of political fights up and down trying to get that approved. And I just think that they're done with that. And meanwhile, you've got Biden going to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia to try and get more oil when he could just be turning north and approving that. That won't happen. The Trudeau government won't fight for it. They're not saying, as we discussed last week, what can we do to get out of the way of producers, the way that Britain's doing to increase domestic production? No, they're still talking about renewables. And on this move to say, all right, let's freeze the carbon tax, something that Patrick Brown had called for before he entered the Conservative leadership race. No, they're going ahead with the carbon tax increase, which comes in on April 1st, and it's going to add, I believe, 2.8 cents. It'll take it to roughly 12 cents a liter, the total carbon tax, on April 1st. They're also bringing in other escalator taxes as well at that time, which will drive up costs, drive up inflation. The Bank of Canada even admitted that inflation is being driven in part by the carbon tax. I think they said it was pushing it up by about half a point. So all of this coming at the worst time. We've got rampant inflation, we've got volatile oil prices, volatile pump prices, and the government just piling on rather than doing what they can to assist. As I said in the column last week, Hal, Justin Trudeau still has his green blinders on.
Fortunately, here in Alberta, as of April 1st, Premier Jason Kenney has said that they're going to be eliminating the provincial tax on gas, 13 cents a litre. That's as long as West Texas Intermediate is $90 or above US per barrel. Now, Brian, Ontario, like Alberta and BC, has lifted its mask mandates, but the federal government is keeping their rules in place. Why is that?
They just do not think that we need to be moving at this point. So whether it's testing, they have relaxed some of the testing rules around international flights. So before a PCR test was required, now they will take a rapid antigen test if it's administered by, say, a pharmacist. They will accept that. So that's good. But they're not relaxing the other parts of the rules at this point. They're being more cautious. Now, is this out of medical, advice? Is it political? Probably a little bit of both. I think that's been the case with most provinces. But, the medical doctors are all saying that we are moving forward. Now, we may end up moving back, and we'll talk about that in a second, perhaps. But right now, we're in a good spot in Canada. We're in a better spot than the United States, where all of these things have been relaxed. But The Trudeau government's not going to be relaxing rules around international travel anytime soon. They're definitely not going to be getting rid of the vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers. That is not happening, not on the cards, especially not so soon after the truck convoy. So yeah, they're keeping their rules in place, but at least now they're not criticizing the provinces, which they have done in the past in what I felt was an overtly political move.
Brian, we only have about 30 seconds left here, but there are reports that another COVID-19 wave is sweeping parts of China with more than 50 million people in lockdown. Is this something we need to be concerned about here in Canada?
We need to be concerned about it if that's the way our politicians and medical officials want to react, because China is pursuing a COVID zero policy. So not, okay, this is a virus, we're going to have to learn to live with it like we do other viruses. They want zero cases. That is not attainable, according to any of the medical experts I speak to. So going back into lockdown is not the way to deal with this. We've learned a lot. We have better data. Alberta's got some of the best public data available in terms of who's at risk. You can even go on the Alberta government's website, do your own risk assessment. We need to look after the vulnerable, not lock down everyone out of concern for making sure that the vulnerable don't get sick. Look after the vulnerable, protect those who are most at risk, but don't lock us down. That's what we need to do.
Political reporter and one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.